1997 was an important year for Star Wars and for me. It marked the release of the Star Wars Trilogy Special Edition, a theatrical re-release to celebrate the 20-year anniversary of A New Hope. This theatrical rerun is when my dad took a then 4-year-old Mike to the theater to see Star Wars, marking the start of a lifelong love affair with a galaxy far, far away. 4-year-old Mike was unfortunately a little too young to experience the other large Star Wars release of 97, the critically acclaimed video game Star Wars Jedi Knight Dark Forces 2, a sequel to the original Dark Forces and a monumental achievement in video game and Star Wars storytelling. Welcome to Holocron Hoard, a Star Wars channel with a simple mission: to play every Star Wars game ever made. Today, we're going to look at the second video game outing for Katarn. We're going to talk about the history of the game, the gameplay itself, the plot, whether its legends are canon, whether parts of it could still be canon, but most important, is it good? Is it fun? If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, click the subscribe button to join me on this journey, leave a comment. All that stuff helps to support the channel a ton. Now grab your newly acquired lightsabers and let's dive into Jedi Knight Dark Forces 2. Unlike when I played Dark Forces, there is no modern official remaster of Jedi Knight Dark Forces 2, commonly abbreviated as JKDF2, so I played the PC release. When I play games for Holocron Hoard, I'm always going to try and play as unmodded as I possibly can, but in the case of older games like JKDF2, they need some gentle massaging in order to run it all on newer hardware. Thanks to a mod initiative known as OpenJKDF2, I was able to get this game running very well with a few modern additions in terms of options, but overall the experience is very similar to what the launch game would have been like. Dark Forces shares developer lineage with the original game. It's even built on the Sith engine, a hilarious name for the successor to the Jedi engine. Unlike the Jedi engine, which was far more Doom adjacent as a 2.5D engine, the Sith engine is fully 3D, a fact it takes great advantage of in its level design and presentation. The Sith engine also adds in an optional third-person mode, and while I mostly played through in first-person still, it was really cool to use it at times. I've never really played this game before, except maybe once with my dad, but I did play a little Jedi Academy, and I remember that being third-person, so I'll probably try and shift over to playing more in third person for the remainder of the Katarn games. This new viewpoint is especially relevant because of the biggest weaponry addition to this game: the lightsaber. The lightsaber is a fully melee, highly potent weapon. I don't know why I'm explaining what a lightsaber is in a Star Wars video. It takes some getting used to, but you can become an absolute menace with it. It cuts grates in the environment, it can block blaster bolts, it even has a parry mechanic for other sabers, although I found that particular thing finicky to get working in a way that felt reliable. Otherwise, tons of familiar weaponry from the original Dark Forces makes its way back into this game. And while you won't be shooting any Dark Troopers in Dark Forces 2, it still has strong variety in NPCs. Some new non-hostile inhabitants on certain levels, and new enemies, including fighting off a series of Dark Jedi and pretty varied boss fights. In addition to the lightsaber, Katarn also gains access to Force powers in Dark Forces 2. At the end of levels, you're given a base amount of Force points to allocate, with bonuses being given if you find all the secrets in a level. There's both light and dark side powers, and it all gives the game a sense of RPG light progression, including the fact that towards the end of the game, there's diverging story paths for both the light and dark side, depending on how often you harmed non-hostile NPCs and how you spent your Force points. One thing this game did make me appreciate is how far modern games have grown in their ability to teach you abilities and mechanics through gameplay. This predates a lot of modern visual and tactile language for tutorials, and as a result, a lot of Force power use is really you having to fumble your way through learning on your own, including having to check the settings all the time to remember keybinds. I also definitely feel like there's a wrong way to spend points, and I probably did it, but I have no regrets about maxing Force jump. It's so funny to Force jump and accidentally take damage. The only gameplay negative experience I really had with this game was the final boss, where it felt like the fight just bugged out. I don't even know how to describe it. I've watched other people doing this same fight in videos. I did all the same things, and yet somehow killing Jerec always happened in a way that resulted in the level totally resetting. I ultimately had to turn cheats on after 2.5 hours of attempts just to finish the game. But it's hard for me to hold that against the game because I can't tell if that's a common bug or not. What I do know is that I think the final boss's design was reaching a little further than what the game was truly capable of, which leads to it feeling wonky and very difficult, but I do admire them for reaching that far. I might also just be bad. Let's move on from that. The game's sound design is really strong, but maybe the standout piece of all of the game's storytelling is the full motion video or FMV cutscenes. FMV is rarely used in modern games. Graphics and tech have just come so far that you don't need it, but God, there is something so charming about this game having real actors portraying the characters in cutscenes. The acting isn't gonna blow your socks off, and the dialogue can leave a lot to be desired, but it's hard not to smile as you're watching some of these scenes unfold, especially if those scenes involve Bok. The person playing Bok is really giving it their all, and you have to admire the commitment because they are not working with much. In fact, let's get into the story. Spoilers ahead, if you care, skip this part. Jedi Knight Dark Forces 2 starts a year after Return of the Jedi and really centers around the quest of a group of Dark Jedi searching for an ancient place known as the Valley of the Jedi. Katarn at the start of the game is looking for his dead dad's holodisk, which is in the possession of 8088, a droid with a real attitude problem. Eventually getting the holodisk, Kyle returns to his childhood home, on the way having a Force vision where the late Jedi Master Katarn informs him that he's going to become a Jedi Knight and tells him to find the Valley of the Jedi. At his home, Kyle watches a recording off the holodisk where his dad says, "By the way, left you a lightsaber and a map to the Valley of the Jedi," but the map was in the ceiling that the Dark Jedi stole. Thus begins Kyle's system-hopping quest to find his way to the Valley of the Jedi, fighting off Dark Jedi, including Pick and Gork, maybe my two favorite Dark Jedi ever, eventually recovering the head of 8088 and using it to locate the Valley of the Jedi on the planet Ruusan. It's after a boss fight here that the story can diverge. The leader of the Dark Jedi, Jerec, is holding good old Jan Ors hostage and makes Katarn an offer. Prove himself by striking down Jan and join the Dark Jedi in their quest. Depending on your Force choices and proclivity for violence in the previous levels, you either go light or dark here. In my case, I wound up going dark. I cut Jan down and then played the rest of the game trying to claim the power of the Valley of the Jedi for myself. I killed Yun, a Dark Jedi apprentice, killed Bok, and then dueled Jerec, ultimately claiming that power and becoming the new Emperor with Saris at my side. The actual ending of the game, and the one that builds into the next game, Jedi Outcast, is that you reject Jerec's premise. Your ship crashes as you're trying to escape the Sulan Star, one of the coolest levels in the entire game. Saris, Bok, and Yun pull you from the wreckage, Bok destroys your lightsaber, and then Saris tries to kill you, but is stopped by Yun, who intervenes on the premise of honor. Saris kills Yun, but Katarn claims his lightsaber and uses it to defeat Saris. The rest of the game plays out largely the same. At the end of your duel with Jerec, he tries to tempt you to the dark side one last time by throwing it in your face that he killed your dad, but he's unsuccessful and ultimately dies. This fulfills a prophecy and frees all of the Jedi spirits trapped in the valley, and the sun sets on a grateful universe. Overall, the story isn't revolutionary, but it is told well through a combination of FMV and level design. The Dark Jedi aren't necessarily fleshed out characters, but they don't really need to be. It's a little monster of the wiki for some who barely get any screen time, but there are also some Dark Jedi who get fleshed out in the Legends EU as a whole. Saris in particular has a backstory so dark that I'm actually not even going to talk about it here because it's horrible. The gameplay of light and dark actions influencing how the story plays out is really cool, and even if it's expanded upon much better in later Star Wars games like KOTOR, it was extremely unexpected for me in this game, and that gave it a lot of weight when I went, oh, I'm evil. Oops. It's obviously a little wonky that Kyle becomes pretty quickly skilled with the lightsaber, but I've never been one to complain about that with any character in Star Wars. You just chalk it up to the will of the Force and call it a day. There's a lot more meat to this story than there was in Dark Forces 1, and it's worth it. It's entertaining. Now that we've talked about the story, let's do my favorite part of the video. Is it Legends? Is it canon? Could it be? If you want a longer explanation of Legends versus canon in Star Wars, you can check out my Dark Forces video. Maybe I'll actually do a short about this so I can just start linking that on screen. That's a good idea. But the short version is, as of 2014, Star Wars media is split into two categories, Legends and canon. Legends is any non-Lucas stuff that happened prior to Disney acquiring Star Wars, and canon is anything published after 2014. As a result, Katarn, Dark Forces 2, and everything in this game are firmly Legends, just like all the games in the Jedi Knight series and its predecessor Dark Forces. However, in the Dark Forces video, I make a case for why it actually isn't hard to headcanon that the game still happened. And I think it's a compelling case. Dark Forces 2, because of the introduction of some Jedi and Dark Jedi, is a little harder to reconcile with the current canon. Now, is it possible that Katarn was running around with a lightsaber a year after Return of the Jedi, even in current canon? Yeah, it's possible. We've seen enough canon media to know that there are lightsabers floating around, that Jedi have survived Order 66, which wasn't even a thing back in 1997, and it's not unreasonable to think that, okay, Morgan Katarn befriended somebody who was a Jedi in hiding, he took the lightsaber in and hid it, eventually Kyle found his way to it. The Jedi that visits Kyle in his vision, Katarn, actually has made it into canon, in name only, as his name is carved into the wall of the safe house in the 3rd episode of the Obi-Wan Kenobi series. Our canon understanding of how Force ghosts work, and the amount of training required to become one, makes it unlikely that Katarn was able to actually post-mortem give Kyle a vision, so you have to fudge that around in your head a little, but the character existing at all at least helps. The Dark Jedi are harder to reconcile. Their commander-in-chief Jerec, his backstory is being an Inquisitor in Legends, one that served Vader and the Emperor very well. The Inquisitorius of Legends had a different hierarchy and structure compared to canon, and while in canon we don't truly know how many Inquisitors there were, it's harder to believe that there was room for someone as ambitious as Jerec who wouldn't have shown up at all in various pieces of media that have focused on Inquisitors to date. Not impossible, just unlikely. Saris would also require a fudged explanation. As mentioned before, I don't really want to talk about her Legends origin in depth because it's so so dark, but she's from a dark side cult on Dromund Kaas, a planet that does technically exist in canon, and we know of other dark side cults, so that part is believable. But she also ends up serving the Empire before committing college athlete style to Jerec after the fall of the second Death Star. Bok is a former slave that Jerec recruits into the Inquisitorius. Yun was a guy who fell to the dark side mostly because of a crush on Saris. Gork and Pick were mutated test subjects under the Empire pressed into the service of Jerec. Ma was a former Jedi turned by Jerec, and look, none of these backstories are truly impossible to believe happened in canon, especially taking the lens I'm currently about to take, where you mostly only look at what's known in game versus extended material. But when they're all stacked together, it's just a lot of Dark Jedi stuff that you have to say, but somehow none of these characters, particularly Jerec, have come up as part of the Inquisitors before, and also these highly active Darkside users would not have been an immediate priority for Luke after Return of the Jedi. And I guess it's not crazy to be like, well, it's only been a year, maybe he hasn't had time, maybe he's busy, but you think he'd make time, right? Also, like, what about the rest of the Jedi? Did nobody sense what the Valley of the Jedi was going to do? Did nobody know about the Valley of the Jedi? All in all, this might be a controversial take, and it's actually evolved for me as I've made this video, but I don't think there's anything that really prevents the major beats and characters in this game specifically from existing. A fact that's going to become squarely untrue for the remainder of the Katarn games for reasons that will be obvious in future videos. Like, the major planets that are required to exist in canon for this do exist. It just requires a lot of stretched belief to fully headcanon. You have to believe that Katarn has existed as a mercenary in the Rebellion era, and his dad was friends with the Jedi Kuran. That Jedi somehow was able to post-mortem get a message to Katarn, even if he wasn't trained to be a Force ghost. Saris's dark cult of origin exists on Dromund Kaas. Jerec, Saris, and most of the Dark Jedi were operating during the Empire, but have been off doing their own things, so they've never been part of any of the media that's depicted the canon version of the Inquisitors. And after the fall of the second Death Star, Luke was either unaware of or too busy to deal with the goings-on of these 7 Dark Jedi as they went about their search for this ancient Valley of the Jedi. Also, none of the other actively alive Jedi at the time cared. It's not an impossible set of beliefs, it's just a lot more far-fetched than Dark Forces 1, where you could pretty easily slot the events into canon and have it be okay. But enough theory crafting, what's the verdict? Overall, Jedi Knight Dark Forces 2 feels like a really, really good sequel to Dark Forces. All the gameplay additions, the force powers, the lightsaber, it all feels iterative and good to play and holds up surprisingly well to modern standards. I got this far in the video, I didn't even talk about quick saving. Quick saving is a game changer. Gone are the lives of Dark Forces 1. I just bound quick save to a mouse button and was just slamming it through the whole game. The FMV is fun, the plot is good enough to be entertaining, the storytelling has drastically improved from the first game, the level design is more varied and interesting. It's really hard to have bad things to say about this game. I have to put aside my feelings about the final boss fight, which left a really, really sour taste in my mouth because I don't know how common an experience what I had is. But that's really the only blemish on what was otherwise a very positive experience. And I know for a fact there are a ton of graphical mods out there that can really bring up this game's visual experience if you aren't as tolerant for the dated graphics of a 1997 3D game. That said, since this is video number 2, we get to do a fun final verdict section. I think Star Wars Jedi Knight Dark Forces 2 is a good video game. But where does it rank amongst all the Star Wars video games I've played? Luckily, there's only one, so this process for this video is simple. It's an iterative improvement on everything Dark Forces did, and I already considered Dark Forces quite a good game. So it gets to slot above Dark Forces 1 in the Holocron Hoard hierarchy. I honestly can't wait to see where Mysteries of the Sith goes after this. I'm really looking forward to it, but that's a video for another day. For now, thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you.